Greetings, true believers, and welcome into the Talk Sports Network and another rousing rendition of Free for All as we take you not only around the state of Florida, but around the country because we cover a little bit of everything. Why? Between the four of us, we've got about 300 years in this business, so we should know just a little bit about everything at this point. Let's go ahead and bring in the four, if you will. We start once again at the top of the state of Florida in Jacksonville, or therefore areas around that, if you will. Television, radio, print. This young man knows the whole market inside and out and has for many years. Sam Kouvaris is here today. Sam, good to see you.
You too, Ed. True believers. Is that a signature of yours?
Always has been, as a matter of fact. It's in all the shows I've been, it's always been Rock On True Believers has always been the end of the show.
I just wondered about that. I wasn't sure if you know somewhere in your deep dark past you were an evangelist or or just a rock and roll DJ. Right?
Actually, True Believers comes from Stan Lee.
Right.
Who wrote all those great comics in Marvel, because for Stan Lee, it was always True Believers. So I picked that up back in the 80s.
There you go.
So
very
it's
good.
Been some time. There you go. It's not evangelistic. Thank God. Let's not go there. Moving south in the state of Florida, if you will, to Orlando, formerly the Orlando Sentinel, where again, he knows all, sees all, tells all when it comes down to college, pro, everything else, and loves to just get into a discourse that actually gets people angry. That's why I loved him for so many years. Still do. George Diaz is here once again on Free for All. He is the man in the dark.
Good to be here. Yeah, I was going to say I'm a man in the dark, but I am the dark knight of this fine group of esteemed 300 plus years of journalism, throwing stuff around and making people go crazy. So here's to 301 years.
I'll do that, brother, every single time. And then heading further down the state to Tampa, St. Pete, in that general area, which, if you know Florida, means you're a Gator. I mean, that's pretty much it. It's like for Gainesville, it's there south and everything west and everything that goes on that way, as you will. It is a pleasure once again to welcome Joey Johnston back into the show. How you doing, Joey?
Very good, very good. We're still trying to figure out how many athletes we have here that have fake vaccination cards. I think we're up to 3, maybe more. We're still looking. And I would pay cash money to see you play a televangelist, by the way. I think that would be very entertaining.
You know, it's the conversation we had earlier off the air. If I had my porn mustache back from the 80s, it would be perfect. Me and Ron Burgundy could do it. We could make a fortune. And he still owes me 10% for that character. I swear. I'm going to one of these days I'm going to find a good lawyer who will help me on that one. So here we go. And by the way, Sam, also you had the stash as well, correct?
In these parts, known as the famous mustache. So, and it was funny because when Shad Khan bought the team, somebody said to him, in a little ring, small conversation, said, Sam had the most famous mustache in Jacksonville for 25 years, and he just looked at the guy and went, "Not anymore."
See, and George is the only one who gets away with it here. So that's.
I had a porn stash for a while there back in the 1890s. Yeah.
You
Still
did.
I
remember your porn stash in your Miami Herald days.
Yeah, there you go. You got to go Miami Vice.
But see, that's it. In that era, I mean, that's when I was, back in that era when I was on Channel 6 in Miami, and I still had the stash. It was de rigueur. I mean, you had to have the Miami Vice look, and I looked good in a white suit. Never wore one on the air, though. Thank God. The CBS people would not let me do it. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Joey, going to start with you this week. Everybody's talking about college football, coaches moving, ADs moving, hither and to, and all sorts of inside sources out there, which Larry Bluestein and I on another show just completely ripped into. The absolute frightening, undeniable level of social media bullshit when it comes to this coach is going to be here and Mario Cristobal. I love the one that said Mario Cristobal is desperate to move to South Florida so he can make his wife happy. And Larry Bluestein came in and said, with the amount of money he's making, he can plant palm trees in Oregon. He can make his wife happy there, which is absolutely perfect. But let's get into it here, because college football now is the NFL junior. I mean, we've all four of us have seen this coming for years. But now with the transfer portal, players moving wherever they want to, almost whenever they want to, coaches making $10 million a year, leaving everybody in a lurch, it is now the NFL junior. And we did see it coming, right?
Yeah, and there's outrage out there. I think we just need to understand the reality of this situation. Like you said, coaches are up and leaving in the dead of night. Lincoln Riley leaves Oklahoma for USC. Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame for LSU. I think there's 24 FBS schools that will change coaches this year, maybe more to come. Who knows? Players are leaving all over the place. You need a scorecard to keep up with it. I mean, Spencer Rattler, the Heisman Trophy favorite in some people's eyes when the season started, is in the transfer portal, leaving Oklahoma. On one hand, we lived through an era where, coaches would recruit players and preach loyalty, and then they would leave for another job. And that certainly didn't seem fair. So I guess if you sign with a school and your coach leaves, you have the chance to leave. So I guess we've dropped all pretenses. It is what it is. Like you said, the NFL junior, it's all about the money. Loyalty doesn't exist anymore anywhere.
But why should we be so surprised about this? I mean, seriously, we've seen college football become a multi-trillion-dollar business over the years, where the schools are cashing in, the networks are cashing in, the coaches are cashing in. Finally, the kids are at least able to try to cash in. So why should we be surprised? And why? And oddly enough, why should anyone care? I mean, isn't this just an extension of basically creating what has always been a professional league in essence?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're finally able to be honest about it and call it a money grab, a big, huge billion dollar business. That's what it is. I mean, I know some of us try to cling to tradition, try to cling to the beautiful Saturdays of college football that we grew up watching, but it's just not that way anymore. It's just not, and we'll have to see how the acid runoff of this as the years pass, how it affects the game with not only the coaches leaving, the players leaving, the realignment. What this is going to look like in 5 years is anybody's guess. But right now, it's a complete free for all, and literally, if you don't pay attention for a day or two, you have no idea who's coaching where or where the players are. It's happening at warp speed.
When did that loyalty disappear, guys? I mean, Joey mentioned it, and there's coaches who had a loyalty factor. I'm not so sure if it's ever been there, and I'm going to go back to Howard Schnellenberger, who was a great friend. Howard came in, led the University of Miami to a national championship, and what was the first thing he did? He bolted for a spring football league. Bang, gone. It's after all that he had done. So isn't loyalty a little bit overdone at this point? I mean, aren't we just kind of living in a fantasy world when we talk about that word with college coaching?
Unless the coach is coaching at his alma mater, and soon you're not going to have that many coaches doing that because none of them will have stayed in any particular school for a while. I mean, Spurrier is a Gator, was a Gator, will always be a Gator, but subsequent to that, everybody else who's come in to the University of Florida has just been kind of the next hire. I mean, Will Muschamp was from Gainesville, but went to Georgia. So, I think that the long term of this is that there's going to be a domino effect among school presidents who are going to look at the budget of football and the recruiting budget and then say, okay, collaboratively with other school presidents, we need to make our ADs create a conference combine, not a countrywide combine, but the SEC, as it continues to expand, is going to have enough schools where they could have their own combine and recruit guys right out of that. And that would save, I mean, what's Florida's recruiting budget? 2 million? I don't know what Miami's is, or certainly UCF's is a little less, and Florida State's is trying to increase it in order to have a national presence again. But I think eventually you'll see some pressure brought to bear on athletic directors from school presidents and then in turn football coaches to cut down on that recruiting budget, and that'll be you'll see the first combine spring up via conferences. I think that's where that's going.
Hey, George,
don't forget,
go ahead.
Don't forget Jeff George. Jeff George went to like 7 different schools between high school and when he finished his college career. So he was just a precursor of all things to come, if you remember that.
But I also think that we're talking good points, but when you talk about a big business in college football, you really are narrowing it down to Power 5 schools. There's a lot of programs out there, the Ivy Leagues, all that. That's not $1 million or $1 billion, $1 million industry. Those are some of the deals are not money makers. So what we're talking about really is the schools, the Alabamas, the Floridas, the Notre Dames of the world. But there's probably the majority of programs out there. They're just struggling to pay the bills, I would think. But this does go back to it is very top heavy in terms of what's going on with transfer portals, with coaches, with the push for playoffs. It is a big business, but we're talking limited amount of schools in that pot.
Well, but then aren't we just working to a point where, okay, let's agree. We're going to have the haves and the have-nots in college football. That's it. You're going to have 40 schools, which are going to be the big money makers, and the rest are going to have to just exist at a lower level. Look, we used to have Division II and Division III schools, which some of us may remember, but aren't we just going back to that model now? And in the end, if the school at Division II or Division III level realizes, okay, look, we can't compete at this level, so we've got to back off and we've got to work within a budget and what we can work with and kind of be satisfied with where we're at. I mean, aren't we sort of regressing back to that stage where it might not be a bad thing for some of these smaller schools?
It would make a lot of sense. I think that is where we're going. But for some schools, it's going to be a long, hard trip down honesty lane before they realize, hey, this is who we are. I think a lot of schools are still in denial and they're trying to play the big school game. And at some point there will be no seats left in the musical chairs and they'll have to face that reality. But it sure seems like that's the direction this thing is going.
I mean, I said a couple of weeks ago, and I still believe it, that there will eventually be a super conference where everybody just looks at each other and goes, all right, we're going to play football, right? And, Florida will be in it, Florida State, Miami will be in it, my alma mater, Maryland, Georgia, Alabama. You could probably name 64 schools off the top of your head. That means that they'll be able to play each other and, losing somewhere early in the year doesn't matter or late in the year because you're playing each other. Vanderbilt's not on your schedule. Western Carolina is not on your schedule. Thankful for Gator fans, I'm sure. But to George's point about some schools not being able to afford it, I mean, Jacksonville University is a prime example of that. They created their football program specifically because the school needed to raise some revenue, and so they knew that there would be enough parents who would be willing to pay for their sons to go to school because it's a non-scholarship program in order to raise money for the school. So they had 100 guys, come in and paying the $60,000 a year. Well, when you get that kind of infusion of money, the school has a chance to get back on solid financial backing. Once it did under the current president, Tim Cost, who's also an alumni, they disbanded the football program. It's gone. I mean, it disappeared last year, just kind of out of the blue too. And, that's one of those things where you realize, all right, at some point, some of these schools, as George said, are going to say, all right, this is dragging against the bottom line. It's not adding to it. We're going to have to get rid of that. And JU did that.
And that seems to me to be actually a good thing for the small schools because let's stop the arms race.
They're not making money on attendance. They're not making money on TV deals.
No.
I mean, they're not making money anywhere except for the guys who are playing, who are paying tuition. That's the only revenue they're bringing in.
Well, look, if you have these major schools, let's just say 40. I guess let's throw that number out here. You have 40 major schools which will eventually walk into Sam's Super Conference, and I agree, it's just going to be like that, and you'll set out geographical divisions, and you'll play that way one day. So here we have 40 teams that have, I'm just going to throw a number out, 50 players, okay? You have a roster, 60, let's say. So there's, how many? 2,400 players who are there right now, and there's a lot of other players out there who want to play college football. Okay, well, once the 2,400 are set, then here you go. You can start picking among them. The kids are going to have to worry more about education. Holy shock, if you will. But then we can just say, look, I can't compete with Alabama and Miami and USC and Oregon. We've got to sit here and do things. Smarter business to me. Small and go back. Here's your super conference idea. and then a minor conference. Why not?
It is, but I think to Joey's point, some of these smaller schools are going to go. It's that tough, as he mentioned, trip down reality lane because they still kind of there still is a movement, there still is some inertia to get into the cool kids club, but financially and logistically it makes no sense. But there has to be a realization that it is who we are, and there's no point in a lot of these smaller schools, as we know, especially at the beginning of the season. You've got schools that come in and they get a big paycheck just for getting whacked 64-0. So what's the point of that? I mean, the point of it is money, of course, but there has to be a come to Jesus conversation in that. What good is this doing? And why don't we just play within the scope of what we're capable of being competitive in?
And
One
maybe-
thing that comes to mind in
Joey.
Tampa years ago, and some may not even remember this, but the University of Tampa had a football program, and in the early 70s, it was kind of a giant killer. It beat Miami at the Orange Bowl. That comes to mind as a win. They had Freddie Solomon as the quarterback. John Matuzak was on the team. They put people in the NFL. But in the mid 70s, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came on as an expansion team, the University of Tampa administrators decided we can't play football anymore. We're losing money as it is, and now we're getting an NFL team. So they disbanded the program. It went away, and it was a tough moment for that school, who kind of wandered in the desert for a few years before kind of rebranding itself as a Division II school. And now it's a very fine athletic program that competes for national championships on a Division II level. It does not have football, but it's a wonderful Division II program. And I know some of the old time alumni still pine for the days of football, but it just wasn't real for them. And I think they made a great decision, and they're doing just fine without football right now.
See,
I'll tell you who loses
that's
here.
interesting. Yeah.
Who loses here, Ed, is the number of kids who are looking for football to get them out of their economic situation, that can't afford to go to a school, who aren't maybe good enough to play at Florida, Alabama, Florida State, Miami, but they're good enough to play at Western Carolina or whatever. And those schools aren't going to be able to offer that kind of scholarship money because they're not going to have the TV contracts. They're not going to have that infusion of money by coming to Florida and getting $1.2 million to play against them. So it may be a small percentage, but there are going to be some kids who lose out for the opportunity to go to college and get some sort of education that they choose, because they just simply can't afford to do that.
Okay, which then
Even
brings
though-
up the conversation. Isn't it all at the end of the day, once again, about, oh my God, I'm going to get hammered for this, getting an education first before worrying about athletics?
Well, that's the whole
remember-
thing, the pretense of student athlete. We've got other fairy tales we can talk about, and the Loch Ness Monster and all that in this program. We want to go deeper into conspiracy theories, but
Oh, no.
no, it's a joke. No, it's there's a pretense of getting education. Sure, they'll roll out some numbers, and sure that there's been some fine gains and examples of, here you go, this is good that they're getting an education. But for the big time guys, mostly this is all about, let's get to the end zone and score, and let's stop the other team from scoring.
Here's a conversation I had with Spurrier once. I said, so what was it like when you were coaching at Duke? He said, well, Sammy,
Hold on a sec. Why is it that every time somebody has to talk about a Steve Spurrier conversation, we all have to drop down into the Spurrier voice?
Because it's hilarious. That's why.
Yeah.
No, gotta tell you, Sam.
I said, yeah, well, I'm telling you, I'm just saying, we play to the whistle. When he was at Duke at the time, now this was in the 90s, or in the 80s actually, it may be different now, but Duke allowed what they call partial qualifiers, 5 partial or non-qualifiers, which means guys on the football team who normally couldn't get in as students at Duke were allowed to get in because they had a special spot where they played football. I said to Steve, well, how many, what's Florida's number? And he said, well, I asked that, and they said, what are you talking about? All of them. So that's that's not that's like George said, that's a myth. I mean, they let guys into school because they can play football,
Hell
not
yeah.
because they're great students or anything. Some of them take advantage of it. Others are just doing whatever the minimum is, and I think the tutoring budget at the University of Maryland last year was $1.2 million for student athletes, so to speak. That's the tutoring budget. All right, in order to just get these guys to keep them qualified. So, as George said, it's a fairy tale. Of course, the famous story, and George, I don't know if you were at that Citrus Bowl when Steve talked about Plaxico Burress, when Michigan State beat them in the Citrus Bowl, and it was Plaxico Burress right, left, up the middle, whatever. And then afterwards, Steve said, well, he could have been a Gator, but, every year they pick one guy who can't go here. I guess I can't say that.
They turned him into like Mickey Mouse. I don't know what's
That's
going
what
on
I'm getting.
there.
He said,
That was a good segue.
Well, you know something, Sam? We went out and we really tried to beat those Hurricanes. We just couldn't make it.
But every year there was a guy in the admissions office who pulled one recruit out of the football numbers and said, this guy can't go here. Okay. He just cannot go here. And Spurrier, of course, couldn't legally say that it was Plaxico Burress, but it was because he said, well, I guess I can't say that, but, I guess I just did. So Burress was going to be a Gator, couldn't get in, ended up obviously at Michigan State.
I can hardly
And
wait.
that's a wrap.
I can hardly wait to get a letter from Disney here in a couple minutes. We have you on a copyright violation here using the Mickey Mouse voice.
I guess Steve should have had some deal with Disney, right? I suppose.
He probably should. Maybe he does, and we don't know about it.
I
Speaking of the Gators,
I hear Joey doesn't mean Daffy Duck, by the way, and that's coming up next, kid. In the next
well, but okay, so we have Sam who does that, and he does. Well, what voice do you do then, Diaz? I mean, come on.
I've got nothing.
I'm a bud.
Throw something in the mix, will you? Give it a shot.
Well, I've got the Irish brogue going. Remember that have another pint, boys. That's bad, I know.
Okay, that was the worst Irish. That was the worst I've ever heard. Okay.
All right, well, you forced me into that situation, and I wanted to tap out, but you twisted my arm, and this is what you get.
I'll tell you something, lad. Next time you want to tap out on an accent like that, I'll be the one to drive the elbow right into your mouth. I'll be there. It is. I'll give you the atomic elbow, lad. Speaking of lads and Steve Spurrier and all that, Sam, University of Florida has a new coach. Whoopee! Which will start everything all over again there. And then there's also, we have to talk about the former head coach at Florida, Urban Meyer, because from what you tell us, it's the Urban Meyer show has just become the height of bad entertainment in Jacksonville, as if you didn't warn us weeks ago.
Well, winning, as we all know, is a habit, and so is losing. And when you go into a game and the other team kind of knows they're going to beat you, like that Alabama-Auburn game, Alabama knew they were going to win, and Auburn knew that Alabama was going to beat them. And it wasn't that they were that much better. It just that's how that game went. But the Jaguars don't have a culture of winning. You need better players to do that. They've got two good players. They've got Trevor Lawrence, obviously, who's one of them, and Josh Allen is a legit Pro Bowl, All-Pro kind of player on defense. But to be a competitive team in the NFL, you need 5 or 6 of those guys on your team, and they just don't have that at this point. The bad thing is that Urban Meyer is he's just bad at these press conferences. He's not believable. He's not sincere. He talks about how much he loves the locker room and all these other things, but it's not selling. It's not going over. And I was at the game last week, and it's fascinating to sit up there and watch the sideline, and he is by himself the whole time. I know that, he's on the headsets with guys up in the booth, but I mean, he's nobody's ever around him. He's by himself down there. Nobody, the only guy ever goes and talks to him is at the end of the game. Trevor Lawrence will go over and put his arm around him, as a show of solidarity, I think. But nobody's ever around the guy. And it's kind of fascinating that's that's a dynamic that I've never seen before on any level. Where
Well,
the
should
coaches
anybody be
literally,
surprised? I mean, seriously, it still comes down to the fact that I can't understand how Shad Khan got to be a multi-trillionaire. The man's obviously fairly intelligent. He has to be. And to hire this circus clown as the head coach who has a litany of problems behind him. I mean, Sam, we've talked about this before here. How could he not see this complete disaster coming? The Jaguars will not go to the playoffs or will not make a dent with Urban Meyer at the helm. Everybody with a brain knows that, except for Shad Khan.
next year they think that that's the year that he needs to make some progress. I think he sold Shad on the fact that they're not going to win this year. And think about this: they've already won twice as many games as they won last year. So you can consider that a success if you want. But it's interesting that to me that Meyer, as the Florida head coach, left there well hated by Gator fans. 60% of all college football fans in Jacksonville are Florida fans. Some of the season ticket buy public for the Jaguars has to be those crossovers. And so those people aren't all fired up about Urban Meyer coming to be their head coach. I can tell you that, because remember, they still can't put him in the Ring of Honor because they're afraid that they're going to boo him in Gainesville if he shows up. So I just think it's funny. Maybe next year, when Dan Mullen is standing on the sideline next to him, he'll have somebody to talk to. Maybe that could be.
Sam, let me ask you a question. It looks like they say coaches lose the locker room. Do you ever think he had the locker room to begin with?
I think, George, that's a real good kind of study in how you capture that when you start. And I don't think he ever was able to achieve that at the highest level. I think that, guys were looking at him tentatively and say, let's see what this guy does. Let's see how it goes. And as you know, coaches don't win or lose games, really. They just kind of keep things together. But the locker room itself has to believe in the overall philosophy of what they're doing, the standard of excellence that is set. And he's been unable to lift that locker room to that point. Those guys do like each other. They play for each other, but they're just not good enough right now to win football games.
So the question then is, as we move forward, and you mentioned you had to bring up Dan Mullen, so if you're going to bring up Dan Mullen, we got to take it to this stage, and I'm sure Joey's and George are going to weigh in on this as well. How long does I can't believe I'm actually, well, no, wait a minute. I can't believe I'm asking this question, knowing exactly what the state of college football is in Florida. How long does Billy Napier get before the fans in Florida start calling for his head? A year? Two? I mean,
2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's the same 2 or 3 years that pretty much everybody gets at this point.
Yeah.
It seems to.
Pretty much.
So,
if you're the head coach of Florida or Florida State or Miami, you're going to get skilled players just by osmosis because that's how many there are in the state. You have to concentrate on creating an offensive and a defensive line rotation, particularly on defense, that sustains both sides of the football like that. Mullen never did that. They had great skill players, but if you can't protect the quarterback, if you can't attack with just the 4 defensive linemen up front in big time college football, then you're always going to be struggling to either stay with the other team or hang on to a lead. And the level of hubris that Mullen had, and if you look through history, not just football, all leaders who fall usually fall from this amount of hubris, like I'm the smart guy and you're not. And that brought him down, in this case, because he refused to believe that his offense couldn't work regardless of which players he plugged in there. And clearly it wasn't working.
Well, coaches are all about ego. And as we all see here, it sometimes gets the best of them. But they all have it. They all have that, I am smarter than the rest of the guys, and I'm going to show you how. And they come up with different offenses. We all saw schemes, and we all saw what Spurrier would do, that famous game where he rotated quarterbacks, things of that nature, the fun and gun. I mean, you can do. There's always looking for innovative ways. But like Sam said, hey, sometimes it just goes back to the basic meat and potatoes. You have to have a strong offensive front and a strong defensive front, and it all starts there.
Well, with
I think when you look at Florida at its best, I mean, obviously most people will look, oh, Danny Werfel and Tim Tebow and all the skill players there, and there's tons of skill players in Florida. But look at those defenses. Look at the athleticism on the defense, particularly up front. I think those are the factors that really made Florida into a championship, SEC national championship type of program, is the ability to recruit those kind of players. And if you don't have them in the SEC, you're going to get exposed.
Yeah, here's something that caught my eye, and this is from GatorsWire.usatoday.com. It is their Gators section of it, and the writer on it I'm going to look at is Tyler Natuno, but just a couple things here. A former assistant under both Saban and Swinney, Napier compiled a 39-12 record in Lafayette. Since a 7-7 finish in year one, he's gone an elite 32-5. Can you really call the coaching in Lafayette and a 32-5 record against that level of competition elite?
Yeah, if you're a Gator fan, you can.
Okay,
Because that's
there it is.
what most writers who are writing about Florida are. I remember the national championship game in Glendale, Ohio State and Florida, and Ohio State's quarterback Troy Smith won the Heisman. Yeah. We're in the end zone, which is where the press box seat was, and they're right in front of us. They're like on about the 10-yard line, and he rolls out to the right, and he's looking downfield, and the backside defensive end chases him down, grabs him, and throws him on the ground. And you all have seen this look. He stood up and looked at the guy like, where the hell did you come from? As the quarterback, he's supposed to know where those guys are, but that guy's not a factor in this play, except at Florida under Spurrier, they were, because, and occasionally under Meyer, they were, in terms of the athleticism, as you mentioned, on the offensive and defensive lines. If you have that kind of player up front, that's when you can say that you're going to become an elite program. Look at who gets drafted out of Alabama after every year. 3 of their starting offensive linemen every year go in the first round.
Well, here's part of that elite issue that I want to bring up here, because, and I'm going to go back to the article, which is, I kind of found this paragraph interesting. Though Napier doesn't bring Power 5 head coaching experience to the table, which of course all of the insiders say Gators have got to have, they're definitely got to have that, or they're not getting a really good coach. He's a big-time recruiter and seems to be the CEO type Florida desperately needed in this cycle. A CEO type? I mean, to Sam's point, you're going to get the great talent no matter what happens. You're going to drop your hat and you're going to get great talent. Does Florida need a CEO type? Don't they need somebody who's going to win games? Because in my opinion, if he's not competing for the SEC championship in year 2, they're going to call for his head.
Yeah, it all remains to be seen. I mean, there's 2 schools of thought here: somebody who's got Power 5 experience and somebody who came up a different way. Now, Napier had Power 5 experience on the staffs of Alabama and Clemson, but he's never been the head coach there. It all remains to be seen. I mean, he seems to come from a great pedigree. He seems to be a pretty good leader of men. So we'll see if he can adjust to the expectations that exist at Florida, if he and his staff can recruit the kind of players to win at Florida.
Well, would you agree with me, though, that if he's not competing for the SEC title at the end of year 2, they're already going to call for his head? He's got to be right there for the title, and if not actually in the championship game, he's got to be there right until the last day.
Yeah, that's the way it is at Florida these days, for sure. You're on the fast track. You've got 1 year grace period, maybe. After that, all bets are off, and you've got to be going for the brass ring. The problem is Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas yet to come. This is a swamp, no pun intended, of talent everywhere, and it's tough going, man. It's not like it was in the 90s. This is going to be a tough deal to win the SEC for a lot of teams, and there's going to be some awfully disappointed fans and coaches and players who end up 8-4 and think they've failed.
With the talent Gators have, should they? Go ahead, George.
No, I was going to say, and to Joey's point, it's also, now that we talked about earlier, now you've got the transfer portal, and you've got that to deal with, which you didn't have before. So that talent pool might get a little thinner. So you've got that dynamic along with everything else that they have to deal with, and high expectations.
Do the Gators
Unrealistic.
have the talent now? I mean, right now with Mullen leaving, to go for that SEC title game in 2 years? I mean, does Napier have sitting there what he needs?
He needs to recruit linemen on both sides of the ball, and I think Richardson is a good quarterback. I think that he can play some. So it'll be interesting to see who he adds quickly as a complement to that. Remember, if you're only recruiting guys with Power 5 experience, the Gators never get Billy Donovan.
Which has been part of the argument that I've had with regard to the changes in Miami, potential changes in Miami and other places. I pointed out that there are instances where if you get a really good top assistant, like from Georgia, like from Clemson, people say, oh, well, you don't need another guy learning on the job. When you're a top assistant at one of these major programs, you're not learning on the job. I mean, these guys are a heartbeat away from the actual gig. So I keep telling people that you may be a top assistant, but and moving over to a head coach, it's a linear move and a move up, yeah, but you've got the experience. It's not like they're just hiring somebody to come out of high school here.
It just
You know,
depends.
we've all-
It depends on the hiring process and the athletic director, the person making that selections. There are reasons why in all businesses or industries in America that there are special elite people doing these jobs, and who picked them, who hired them, who saw that coming. Some people are just better judges of talent than others. I know when Billy Donovan was hired, he was 29 years old. He had been an assistant at Kentucky. He'd been the head coach at Marshall. And Jeremy Foley had, some trepidation perhaps. He liked Donovan, but Rick Pitino, called Foley and said, do you think Billy Donovan in 5 years will be one of the nation's best head coaches? And Foley said, absolutely. So Pitino said, why not hire him now? Why not let him be your head coach instead of somebody else hiring him? So there is a bit of a leap of faith in some of these guys who haven't been big time head coaches, but you've got to have the ability to see the future and know that somebody is capable of doing that job one day. And that really is the difference between somebody hiring somebody who's average and somebody who's elite. And there are just people who see that better than others.
They tried to recreate that with Mike White, and they haven't quite gotten to that yet, but they did try to kind of recreate that in that same kind of mold. But it's tough. We've all interviewed assistant coaches in all different sports, and when you host a show, you get a little bit different access than other guys do. And for a couple of years, I hosted the Jaguar shows, and you would talk to a different assistant every week as one of the segments. Well, Robert Saleh came in and sat down, and the first time he sat down and talked, when he walked out of the studio, I turned around and said, well, he'll be a head coach soon. And sure enough, we went to the Rams and he was the coordinator. And then all of a sudden he's the head coach of the Jets. But as Joey said, you can see it, and it takes the right athletic director to maybe the most, besides being kind of an accountant, maybe the most important quality that athletic directors have to have is that ability to see that coach, to see that person as a successful leader at the next step. And when you do that, I mean, it's a home run every time.
I want to move on here, but before, one last thing in college football, I want to get all three of you to weigh in on this briefly, if you will. We have touched on the transfer portal, which to me is nothing more than a combine now. I mean, here it is. It's another instance for coaches to now go, oh, look, here's the board. I got 250 kids sitting here. Let's go after this one, and let's go after this one. And they can start cherry picking now in what is almost a pro combine situation here. Has not the transfer portal made things more even in so many ways? I mean, now you don't have to wait 2 years for a kid to come in and learn your system. You can get somebody who walks in that day and becomes your starting offensive tackle next weekend.
It's possible it may even out the field. It's possible some programs can get better quicker. But again, it comes down to judging talent. You've got to know who these guys are, whether they're bringing baggage and problems, or whether they're just really talented players that got caught in a system where they didn't get playing time. So again, it goes down to judging talent. And I know it's changing, and it's already changed the way people recruit. There are staff members at every school in America that their sole job is to look at that transfer portal every day and to get information on these players, and it's going to change the way high school guys are recruited. It's going to change the whole recruiting landscape, and we haven't quite seen all the effects yet, but for sure, if you're an astute judge of talent, here's a chance to go faster than you could have before.
And does this not lead the big schools again to making the jump? I mean,
I,
quite frankly, the Alabamas, the Miamis, the USCs, the Oregons, the Texases, these are the ones that are really going to take advantage of this. They're going to siphon off a lot of the big talent, and we're going to come right back to where we started all this, which is these lower schools are simply not going to get the big talent anymore because that big talent is going to be now distributed just like a National Football League draft.
that's what I was going to get to. I think that also from the player standpoint, do you want to go play at Western Carolina or do you want to go play at Alabama? If you have the chance to play at Alabama, you know the answer to that. So these guys, whether they fit the bill or not, are not looking per se that I think every case is individual. You have to judge it on its own merits, but a lot of these guys are looking for the big time home run shot at playing at a big time school.
Sam, this is the move right to your super conference that you talked about. This is paving the way.
Yeah, I was recruited by a lot of big schools coming out of high school, and I was advised not to go to Notre Dame because my advisor said, look, they're going to recruit the top 10 high school Catholic quarterbacks in the country. One will play, 9 will sit, so they're not playing at Boston College or Michigan or Michigan State or any of the other schools that they have to play. Of course, when you're 17, you're like, well, that's okay. I'm the guy that's going to play. But, it doesn't allow schools to do that any longer. Bobby Bowden would not understand how this works because his philosophy, if you remember, he would bring quarterbacks into the roster. He would groom them for 2 years, and then they would be the starter for 2 years. That got screwed up when the kid from Washington, he's from Walla Walla, got thrown out of school. And then all of a sudden, Chip Ferguson had to start in that game against Miami that year at the beginning of the season. So, that was how schools tried to do that. Guys came in and obviously before freshmen were eligible to play, they groomed them and then they let them figure out who the starter would be for the next couple of years. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. I think Kirby Smart found that out at Georgia. I mean, he had Eason and Fromm and Fields all on his roster at the same time. And if he had a decision to make again, you think he would have gone with Jake Fromm again? They did play for the national championship that year, but with Justin Fields, do they win it? I mean, if Smart is a phenomenal recruiter and just a compiler of talent, but maybe not the guy who can figure out which quarterback to play all the time.
And if I'm not mistaken, on the transfer portal thing again, last spring, I can't remember the school or the kid's name, but somebody graduated early, participated in spring football, the 15 practices, and did not like the looks of the way the depth chart was shaken out, and he entered the transfer portal. So, are we going to see that? Are we going to kind of sample a school for a spring season and then transfer? Maybe that's where the future is going to take us too.
If they're allowed to do it, I mean, they
are allowed to do it. It's just
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Again, another larger question. I've heard some coaches say this is for all these kids, when they get later on in life, it's going to be, where are you going to go back for your homecoming? You went to 5 schools. I mean, who do you identify with?
You know what the kid's going to do? Kid's going to say, let me check my bank account and call my agent and find out from my NIL representative where my sponsorship is right now. I'll let you know. Yeah. It's where they go. George, let's go ahead and get to you here. Major League Baseball is in another well, let's be honest here. See, I posted this on Twitter and I kind of got good and hammered and back and forth. I said, wait a minute, people, everybody take a breath. This lockout is no big deal. Come on. We got lots of time until we get to spring training. This is a dead time. The only thing this means is that everybody can't gather at the winter meetings and get the free food and the free cocktails. We got plenty of time to get here, and everybody knew this was coming. So why seriously should anybody be that upset? I just don't see I don't see this becoming another one of those moments where, holy crap, in the morning, baseball's going to die. which we hear every couple of years and never happens.
Yeah, but by the same token, Ed, this is a sport that really can't, whether it's fact or fiction, whether this is going to be a prolonged deal. Baseball really isn't in a position of strength to be throwing darts, self-inflicted wounds, if you will. We had to sit doing the research. I believe, understandably so, because of COVID. I think attendance was down about 30-something%, but more to a point that I would find a little bit more than a little bit concerning to the powers that be in MLB is that the TV numbers are down about 12%. So that means that people are staying home more, yet not watching baseball. And a secondary point here in that how the optics are just horrible is that they spent about I think it was 1.4, 1.7 billion dollars on contracts, on player contracts, on free agents right before the lockdown. So the optics are horrible here, Ed, whether the reality, like you said, whether they work it out or not, and Lord knows. But this is Hatfields and McCoys, and it's hard for me to root for either side.
Well, this comes down to money too, and I'm looking at this right now in Forbes magazine. They were talking about financials, and that's what everybody looks at. Liberty Media owns a piece of the Atlanta Braves. I think they own the Atlanta Braves, actually, in many ways, a percentage of it. And Liberty Media has to put out all their earnings. It's available for people to look at. For the third quarter of 2020, the Braves had revenues of $110 million with an operating loss of $16 million. For quarter 3 2021, revenues were up $234 million with operating income of $30 million, an increase of 288% year over year. They're making a spitload of money here, George. I mean, so locking the players out, they can afford it at this point. There's no death knell here that I see.
Yeah, but there's two greedy sides, and that's the problem. There's so much money, maybe they do commit suicide. Because will they come to terms? I don't know. But that's the point. There's so much money, everybody gets big eyes, and I think we're in for a bigger fist fight than you might imagine.
Can you tell me in one sentence what the lockout is about?
Money.
The
right,
share of
but
money.
okay, you can say that, but from a public relations standpoint, the owners have not done a very good job at defending their position. You can't say in one sentence, all right, look, here's why we're doing this, because this isn't right. The players, when free agency was an issue or when they went on strike for different things, they did, whether they were right or wrong, they did a real good job of public relations, of setting the tone of here's why we're out. Right now, there's probably not a single baseball fan who can tell you, first of all, like Ed, like you said, it's the off season. Nobody really cares.
Nobody cares.
But yeah, but I mean, can any routine baseball fan, of which George said the numbers are dwindling, tell you easily what the lockout is about? No. And so if the owners expect anybody to kind of look at this thing and go, they're right, they need to do a much better job of getting their message out.
Well, it would seem at this point that the players' union is actually getting a decent message out here, because they're saying, look, the teams are being rebuilt constantly. You're blowing out the young talent. You're not giving them a chance to make their money. You're also not giving us a chance to get any sort of tenure that we can get here in order to have an increase in salary and be able to make a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and they want more free agency. But when you look at it, and I'm going to go to your point as far as the ownerships are concerned, owners consistently in baseball are crying poverty. We're running out of money. Bullshit. You got tons of money. And Major League Baseball owners have done the worst job of running a professional sports franchise of any one of the big four, the big five. So for going to your point, as far as PR is concerned, the owners can't cry poverty anymore. It's too difficult, I think, at this point to explain to the casual fan. Casual fan just wants the games, that's all. And the players want to make money, that's all.
Yeah. And the players have some good points. I mean, they want to de-incentivize tanking. That makes sense. I think fans would go along with that. And
how do you do that?
That's a good question, but that's obviously not good for the sport to have, just say, hey, we're going to call it a day and lose. I mean, who signs up for that?
Yeah, and another part of it is essentially the players want the baseball version or closer to the transfer portal. They want less control by the teams over these players. I know it's an art form here in Tampa with the Tampa Bay Rays, their ability to keep players under their control as long as they possibly can, and then divest when the big contract time comes up. They are absolute artists at that, at identifying young players and keeping them in the minors to a certain point, and limiting their ability to to expand their income.
Well, see, that's the point right here. And I remember in the conversations I had with Marvin Miller over the years, that's pretty much what he always walked down to, is the players need to be able to make as much money as they can in as short a period as they can, just like any other business.
Right.
And they can't do that right now.
No, they can't. And that they're seeking greater control over their destiny, over their financial destiny. And right now, the owners and the franchises have the ability to control a lot of that. They just want more of it. They want more shares of the pie, and they want the ability, if you get called up to the major leagues and you have 2 or 3 good years, to maximize that income instead of being under control of a team for as long as you are now. So, and these are things, again, you're right. The fans just want to see the games. They're not going to care until March, until spring training is supposed to start, and it doesn't. That's when they'll start to care. But and at some point, you know, it is Hatfields and McCoys, but somebody's going to break, and it's probably going to be the players, because these guys are going to need to get paid, the lower level guys. So that's when the rubber hits the road, I think, and that, who knows when that'll be. You know, probably not long after March, to be honest.
Probably April 1st.
Yeah.
Right in there when they well, no, we have to look down, and I don't know what this date is, but we got to find out when the first paycheck is due in 2022.
Right.
And when
based on this discussion, you'd think that the players were on strike versus being locked out.
Yeah.
Based on the arguments that have been presented here in the last 5 minutes. Nobody has said, well, the owners, blah, 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 because the owners have not gotten their message out as to why they've even locked the players out.
Well, you know what, the thing that always gets me about this is players want, look, the players want what we all want. They want a good job. They want some security. They want to make as much money as possible. They want to live in a nice place. They want to make as much money as possible. They want to have a nice car. They want to make as much money as possible. I think I'm getting into a rut here, but I think that's what they want. And they should be able to do that. The point of it is the owners are making spit loads of money. These are their athletes. The NBA has done it very well. And the players say, I should be able to leave after 4 years. And by the way, if I'm playing for the Detroit Tigers and you have a farm system that I can see and my agent can see and everybody can see is absolute junk, I'm making this up as I go along, why would I want to stay here? Because I also want to win a championship, because that's going to be more money for me. That's going to be more stature. I actually got into this game because I want to win a World Series. And if you're not going to give me the chance, I'm out of here. Does this not come down to the fact that Major League Baseball owners are still terrible stewards of the game and their own franchises?
Yeah, well, you know, this is kind of the case. I mean, when you we were talking earlier about, you know, Shad Khan, and, you know, did he make obviously what seems to be a bad choice with Meyer? Sometimes these guys make horrible decisions in terms of leadership and in terms of business decisions. They can have a very good business acumen in other ways, but not in the baseball sense or in the sports sense.
In the sports sense, absolutely. So I realize that this is a discussion to have, and everybody's gone a little bit crazy about this, but should we really care that there's a lockout in baseball right now? I don't think so.
Not now. Our attention span will, for the most part, the American sporting public is it's just background music right now, and so we're, you know, getting through the holidays and bowl games and basketball season, and in March when you can't go to a spring training game, that's when people will start to notice.
Well, look, here's the thing: if you want to go ahead and get involved in a situation here, and if you want to talk about, you know, what's happening in baseball right now, let's make this even simpler, okay? The storyline that was missed brilliantly in the last week was Rob Manfred admitting that Major League Baseball had created different baseballs and was putting different baseballs in different games and in different parks in order to help create more offense. That's game fixing. That's Major League Baseball saying, we fix the games. And nobody covered that. That story came and went like this.
Like moving the fence in Colorado, you know. that kind of stuff. I mean,
it went
you know,
absolutely nowhere.
exactly.
But
Outrageous.
But should that not be the storyline that we're more concerned about more than anything else right now? The fact that Major League Baseball, and look, this goes down to, we've talked about Barry Bonds here, we've talked about players who are cheating. Major League Baseball just cheated its fans and cheated its players and cheated its pitchers and cheated its hitters by creating a fixed game. Why don't we care about that? I mean, maybe, oh, what, it doesn't move, maybe it didn't move the dial on the betting meter.
Yeah, we should care about it. And baseball, in a lot of ways, is in a crazy position where, for as traditional as baseball wants to be, boy, there's a lot of crazy things going on in the game with the rule changes, the ghost runners, the way they're changing the playoffs now. They're clearly entranced with the March Madness one and done model of the wild card. There's so many changes that have happened to the so-called traditional sport of baseball in the last few years, and this, baseballs for different situations and juicing or non-juicing balls to go in and out of the park. Yeah, that's a pretty big concern.
George, I
Baseball.
noticed you're back, George. I was a little bit afraid that perhaps we pissed you off and you decided to leave.
I didn't like your last point, Ed, and I had to
Right.
take a few seconds to decompress and not lose it completely on the air. I apologize to you and my esteemed colleagues here, but I took a chill pill and I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Well, the show's over now, so what the hell? Now you're out of it. It's
If they juice the baseballs anymore, they're going to have to put the pitcher behind a screen because it's a deadly situation for a lot of those guys or they're going to have to make them wear helmets or something. I mean,
well, George, this is what we brought up, and let me get you to weigh in on this finally here. The point I made was that we're talking about Major League Baseball and the lockout. Every single outlet missed the story that passed in the last week where Rob Manfred was caught and admitted that they changed the baseballs, that they were kicking out baseballs that didn't go as far in some stadiums or went farther in certain stadiums, but they were basically using two baseballs. That's fixing the game.
That's anti-Deflategate. That's the opposite of Deflategate, right? Inflategate.
But that's why my head exploded on that, because I'm looking, is anybody paying attention to this? And nobody said a word. So I guess I'm missing the boat. It's not that big a deal that baseball's fixing their own games.
Yeah, that's a little. It's hard to fathom, but that to me, attendance is. They're making money here. It seems like these worlds don't seem to connect in terms of logic, because they're making a lot of money, yet attendance is down, their TV numbers are down, and people aren't watching and people aren't going to the games, yet they're making money. So go figure.
Well, but look, let's be honest. People don't want to go to the games anymore as much as they did. Look, this thing happens right now in hockey in the NBA, and it's happening in football. I've had friends of mine who are huge NFL fans who've gone to every single game, and they've tailgated, and they've done this for years. They've gone to college games. They tailgate. They do the same thing. They tell me, and I swear it's the same. Look, I don't want to be bothered with parking. The traffic sucks. It's now costing me $40 to park my car. The food price is up. I'm going to sit home with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and 2 6-packs of Sam Adams, and I'm done. I don't care. I'm paying $25 to watch the game, and I don't have to leave my chair.
So and you got the high def 60-inch TV as well to go with it. So
sure.
Yeah, and NFL owners have admitted, and having gone to owners meetings, that their number one competition is an affordable, an affordable big screen at home. And baseball is starting to face that, and every other sport continues now to face that. The affordable big screen at home is making it a lot easier for fans to enjoy the game as much, or if not more, by not being there.
Well, there's also another side dig on this, and gee, we probably will do this next week. We can dig into this even a little bit deeper. But almost nobody goes to University of Miami games this year. You can watch the stadium. I mean, everybody's disguised as blue seats. And I've had a number of people who are season ticket holders tell me that they don't go to the games anymore because the atmosphere is ridiculously violent. There's tremendous amounts of fights in the stands. People say, I don't want to take my kids to the games anymore because of what's being thrown, what's being verbally said. said it's not an atmosphere where I can enjoy anymore. And I've heard that with Canes games, Dolphin games, Gator games, Seminole games. I've heard it throughout that a lot of people just don't want to go anymore because it's not a good atmosphere and it's not fun. Doesn't that mean that the franchises have got to take a little bit of control here and start kicking out the jerks and making the place a little bit better to go to? A little safer?
My theory
That's
is in
coming up.
50 years, there will be no fans. Every sporting event will be a TV show. That's a subject for another show, obviously, but every franchise, college and pro and all sports has these concerns about the game experience, about getting people into the stands, when many of these people just want to be in front of a television to bet or to follow their fantasy team or
Well,
to
that's
have
it.
the comfort of their home. So yeah, getting people into stadiums is going to be an issue that's going to continue for years and years and years at all levels.
I'm
Talk to any sports bar owner, Ed, any sports bar owner. It used to be that the Steeler fans would sit in front of this TV and the Bucks fans would sit in front of this TV and the Colts fans would sit in front of that TV. Now they all want to watch the red zone and have their phones out to look at what's happening on their fantasy team.
Well, television, again, we should probably discuss this. Between television and gambling and fantasy leagues, it has destroyed a lot of these reasons to even go to the game, but it's created another reason. And look, when I watched the World Series this year, I pointed it out. And holy crap, look, it's the Draft King. What is the next pitch going to be?
Yeah.
Gamble.
Right.
And there's the odds right there in a graphic for the next pitch, what the next run is going to be, who's going to score. Look, my beloved Boston Bruins are running a thing right now where you get points, where if you then decide, if you are able to guess who scores the next goal, you're able to get points and you're able to win jerseys and money. And it's all gambling is what it is. Why should the fan go to the games anymore? So,
by the way, Ed, you're getting me upset again because I had Antonio Brown in my flex this week, and it's looking pretty dim unless we get the COVID card comes through.
Look, I'm proud of this crew right now.
Fantasy. I need 12 points from Antonio Brown, and apparently I'm not getting it, Ed. You're pissing me off again, man, with this.
You have no idea how proud I am of this crew because we just went an entire show and nobody talked about Antonio Brown. Thank God.
Right.
We got rid of
it. We do talk about it in terms of the FBI showing up. That's what we need to do.
That's going to be next. Reminder to everybody where to get a hold of our esteemed group, if you will. Mr. Diaz, when he does show up, The Dark Knight, you can check him on Facebook and Instagram at George Diaz 758. Twitter is at George Diaz. For Joey Johnston, Facebook is at Joey Johnston 372. Twitter and Instagram. What great pictures. Joey Johnston 813. I haven't quite gotten into Instagram yet. I'll have to do that one of these days. And Sam Kouvaris, of course, he's across the board. Facebook and Twitter at Sam Kouvaris. Instagram at Sam Kouvaris Jr. And the web is samsportsline.com. Gentlemen, as always, great fun. I think we're going to have to do a whole show next week just on the gambling factor and why no one's going to game. Joey, I think, has hit it. In 20 years, why should you go to a game? Because at that point, you're going to have the goggles. You'll be able to actually be at the game in virtual reality. Why go to the game? There you go.
Bottom line, though, is someone will make money off no fans. There's somebody that will come up with some kind of angle that we haven't thought of yet that will capitalize on the fact that people aren't going to the games, but they'll make money off the fact that they're at home.
I'm telling you, it's virtual reality. The dancing cheerleaders, you can actually reach out and touch them in your living room. Everything will be happy at that point.
Virtual reality probably will be the way we watch games one day. You're right.
And you'll
scary.
No, it won't, because we'll be dead.
You're right. You're right about that.
We'll be gone, man, long before that. Hey, guys, thanks so much. Have a great week, a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you, gentlemen.
Right.
All right, that is it on the free-for-all side of things. Don't forget, go to Talk Sports Network. That's TalkSportsNetwork.com. See all the shows. And also you can get a hold of me on Facebook and Twitter at Berliner Speaks. See it right? That's right up there, TalkSportsNetwork.com. For George, for Joey, for Sam, for myself, and everybody involved, thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Have a great week. Rock on, true believers. See ya.